They tell us that space is empty, a black void where silence reigns supreme. But I learned the hard way that space isn't empty at all. It's filled with echoes, forgotten relics, ancient battles, and horrors we can't even begin to understand. My name's Alexander Holt, former Chief Systems Engineer aboard the exploratory vessel USS Pandora. I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know the truth. Someone needs to understand what happened before it's too late. You might not believe me by the end, but I need you to hear this to the very last word. Because if you're ever out there, if you ever find it, you'll know exactly what to do. We weren't looking for anything that day. We were just another ship following orders, survey mission, deep space. Boring work, or at least it should have been. But that's when we stumbled across it. The graveyard. It started with the ping of a long-range scanner. A cluster of derelict ships orbiting a dead, dark star. The fleet was massive, stretching farther than our cameras could see. Ships of alien design, hollow husks drifting in silence. They had clearly been there for centuries, maybe millennia. Some were twisted and broken, others looked eerily intact. They hovered lifelessly as if frozen mid-battle. A scattered wreckage filled the size of a small moon. Our captain, Maria Ellis, called us to the bridge. "We've found something," she said, her voice sharp, her eyes bright with curiosity. "A graveyard." A nervous murmur ran through the crew. None of us had ever seen anything like it. This wasn't human wreckage. The designs were alien, sharp, intricate, like nothing in our databases. Weapons lay silent on shattered hulls, gashes torn through reinforced plating as if whole battles had been fought and forgotten out here in the dark. I sat at my station running scans. "Anything alive out there?" Ellis asked. "Negative," I said. "No heat signatures. No movement. It's dead." That's what I thought. Anyway, we did what any curious humans would do. We sent out a team. A shuttle left the Pandora, carrying 6 crew members to the largest derelict ship in the graveyard. I stayed back on the bridge, watching their video feeds through flickering displays. The alien vessel was colossal, miles wide, and hauntingly empty. Strange glyphs and markings covered its walls, glowing faintly in an unnatural light. The air inside was stale and oppressive, like the weight of centuries pressing down on you. My friend, Lieutenant Chambers, was on the team. He joked to break the tension. "It's like walking through a tomb," he said, and that's exactly what it was. The team wandered through shattered corridors and cavernous halls filled with strange, alien technology. They found no bodies, no signs of who or what had fought here. Only silence and the lingering, inexplicable feeling that they were being watched. That's when Chambers found it. A black mass at the center of the ship, a pulsating thing attached to the main systems. It was organic and mechanical, a twisted mess of wires, flesh, and shadow. It looked alive, breathing somehow. "What the hell is that?" Chambers whispered. We didn't know it yet, but that was the hive mind. When the team returned to the Pandora, their faces told the first story, drawn, pale, and silent, like they'd left part of themselves behind in that derelict tomb. Chambers wouldn't look me in the eye. The others, Carson, Lieutenant Ortega, Dobbs, moved through the ship like ghosts, their steps slow, their voices distant. I tried to shake the feeling off. We were explorers, after all. Space weighed on the mind. It did things to people. But then it started. The ship's systems, perfectly stable before the mission, began to glitch in ways I'd never seen. The lights in the corridors would flicker and dim. Shadows seemed to stretch and curl unnaturally. Doors would lock and unlock at random. Sensors would give readings of movement in places we all knew were empty. And the whispers. It began as faint static in the comms, just a background hum. I'd heard noises like that before. Equipment interference, solar radiation, nothing worth worrying about. But soon, the static took on a rhythm. It was soft at first, as though something breathing. Then came the voices, words in a language that wasn't ours, fragmented and unintelligible, yet deeply unsettling. I remember Chambers storming into the control room that night. His face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Who's been messing with the comms?" he demanded. His voice trembled beneath his anger. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You're telling me you don't hear that?" He gestured to the intercom speakers overhead. I listened, but there was only the faint static. "It's nothing, Chambers," I said. "Probably feedback." His hands balled into fists. "That's not nothing, Alex. I hear voices. They're in my head, telling me things I don't want to hear." "What kind of things?" He stared at me, his expression hollow. "They hate us." Chambers left the control room, mumbling to himself, his words too low to make out. That was the last time I saw him sane. The next morning, the crew began to fracture. At first, we didn't even realize it. Ortega accused Dobbs of tampering with the food dispensers. Dobbs snapped back, calling Ortega paranoid. Carson started yelling at me during a systems check, claiming I was covering something up. None of it made sense. These were good people, a close crew who trusted each other with their lives. But something had gotten inside their heads. The words turned sharper, accusations grew personal. By day 4 after boarding the derelict ship, the Pandora had become a powder keg of suspicion. Then the hallucinations began. I saw it first in Lieutenant Ortega. She was sitting at the mess hall table, staring at a steaming mug of coffee, her hand shaking violently. I approached her. "You okay, Lieutenant?" She looked up at me, her eyes hollow. "It's in the coffee." "What?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "The voices. They're inside the coffee. I hear them when I drink." I took the mug gently from her hands. There was nothing unusual about it, just dark liquid. Ortega grabbed my wrist suddenly, her nails digging into my skin. "They're laughing at us," she hissed, her eyes wide with terror. "They think it's funny." I pulled away and called for the medical team. That same day, Ortega attacked Dobbs with a wrench, screaming that he was one of them. By now, even I could hear them. They were louder, more insistent. Sometimes they sounded like screams, other times like people I knew. My crewmates, my family, even voices that didn't belong to anyone at all. They burrowed into my head when I tried to sleep, invading my dreams with images of dark, writhing shapes. The hive mind wasn't content to wait anymore. It was pulling us apart piece by piece. Captain Ellis called a meeting on the bridge to try to restore order. I remember the way her voice wavered as she addressed the crew. "This stops now," she said. "Whatever's happening to us, we have to stay calm. It's not each other we need to worry about." But even she couldn't deny the madness spreading through the ship. Her voice cracked. Her hands trembled at her sides. "What are we supposed to do, Captain?" Carson shouted. "You've seen what's happening. Dobbs is dead. Ortega killed him." I said stay calm. Ellis snapped, slamming her fist against the console. "Calm?" Carson laughed bitterly. "You're in on it, aren't you? You're hearing them too." "Enough!" Ellis screamed. Carson lunged at her, and in an instant, the bridge descended into chaos. People were shoving, screaming, punches were thrown. I pulled Carson back as he spat at the captain. "I know you're lying," he roared. Ellis pulled out her sidearm, her hands shaking violently. "Stand down." I said stand down. In that moment, I realized it didn't matter anymore. The hive mind had won. I stopped sleeping. Couldn't. The whispers never stopped. They rattled inside my skull, crawling into every corner of my mind. I tried to block them out, stuffing my ears, blasting white noise through my console. But it was no use. I started seeing things too. Shadows that weren't mine. Figures standing at the end of the corridor, just out of reach of the light. I knew what they were. I knew what it was. The hive mind had taken root in the Pandora's systems, infecting the ship, feeding off the crew's fear and hatred. It was playing us against each other, whispering into our ears until we tore each other apart. And once we were dead, it would move on. It would find Earth. By then, there were only 4 of us left: Ellis, Carson, Chambers, and me. Ellis had locked herself in her quarters. The captain we'd all once respected, now a broken, mumbling wreck. Carson stalked the halls with a knife, muttering about betrayal. Chambers hadn't spoken in days. He just stared at the walls, his mouth moving silently, as if repeating something only he could hear. And me? I knew what I had to do. I spent hours tracing the hive mind's infection through the ship systems. It was in everything: communications, navigation, life support. There was no way to purge it. It had only one goal now: to take the Pandora home. That's when I made the decision. I would destroy the ship. It wasn't easy. I had to bypass the safety protocols, disable the alarms. The hive mind fought me. Systems I thought I'd locked would come back online, displays flashing with incomprehensible alien text. The whispers screamed at me through the speakers. "Stop," they said. "You don't have to do this. We can save you. We can fix you." But I ignored them. I activated the ship's self-destruct sequence. I ran to the escape pod as the ship's systems blared the countdown. Self-destruct sequence initiated. 10 minutes to core detonation. As I sealed the escape hatch, I heard Carson pounding on the door, screaming. His voice was ragged, desperate. "You're killing us, Holt. You're killing us." But I couldn't let it win. I launched the pod, drifting into the cold dark, watching as the Pandora shrank in the distance. I heard the whispers one last time, screaming in my ears as the ship exploded. A blinding flash. Silence. The Pandora was gone. They say I'm mad. When the rescue team found me drifting in the void, they didn't believe me. How could they? What I saw, what I heard, it's beyond understanding. The hive mind is still out there, somewhere in that graveyard of dead ships, waiting for the next crew to stumble across it. If you're ever out there, if you hear whispers in the dark, leave. Don't look back, because if it finds its way home, humanity won't stand a chance. This is Alexander Holt, signing off. Pray you never hear the whispers.